story of the Helsinki Rakamadios, the patriarch dies. And so each story, 1901, 1902, episode 1, episode 2, must resemble some historical event. And so the tension in the story comes from the choice of historical events that the students choose. So the one who has AIDS, as he slowly spirals towards death, chooses increasingly depressing historical events. There are plenty to choose from in the 20th century. Whereas the one who's healthy tries to choose more positive ones. So the story thematically is, where was the 20th century going? Is it a century of murder and genocide? Or is it a century of emancipation and liberation? It's that tension of how do we read the history of the 20th century. So I wrote that story to try to explore what is storytelling about? What can we do with stories? Where do stories come from? How are they told? What structures them? My next book was a novel called Self. And you're always told by publishers that novels sell better than short story collections, which is true, because Self, my first novel, sold 1,200 copies, which is a 50% improvement over Helsinki. In Self, I was interested, being a young man, I was interested in exploring, this one I remember started with Psych 101. I remember in Psych 101, which is a wonderful course to take, Introduction to Psychology is great. And one of the things I remember reading in Psych 101 was how men interrupt women a lot more than women interrupt men. And there's other little facts like that that this section we were doing on the difference between the genders explored. And I was struck by that. And I realized, here I'm a male, what is the female other like? And I decided in my first novel to explore the female other. So I told the story of a young man who, while backpacking in Portugal, one night after eating sweet potato, metamorphosizes into a young woman. So he wakes up one morning and he's a young woman. And he remains a young woman for 7 years and then becomes a man again. So I was interested in exploring sexual identities, but also sexual orientation. Because don't forget, my character, I always get the he, she right. When he wakes up as a she, he's still in his mind a male heterosexual. So he's attracted to women, which on the outside makes her look like a lesbian. But in her mind, she's a male heterosexual. And slowly over the course of 10 years, she starts changing. So they're exploring the body as sort of a geography. You know how we all say we adapt to our environment? Inuit are short and fat because they're in the Arctic and it's cold, you have to be plump. Whereas, in the tropics, people are skinny because it's so hot. Well, I was exploring the idea that our bodies themselves are kind of environments that we adapt to. So the male mind supposedly adapts to the male body, the female mind adapts to the female body. I was exploring all those questions. That was what I was trying to explore there. Clarify for me those differences. Because it is one that I find lasts, whereas colored skin really doesn't matter, morphology really doesn't matter. It is interesting how, I remember there's a Canadian writer named Mavis Gallant, and she underwent an operation. And when she woke up from her operation, she was completely confused. But she said there's two things she could remember. There's two certainties she could rely on. First, that she was thinking in the English language. She knew she was thinking in English, and she knew she was a woman. Everything else she couldn't remember. She couldn't remember her name, her age, where she was, why she was there. Only those two things, the language she was thinking in and her own sex. So it does go deep, so I was exploring that. And finally, with Life of Pi, which did considerably better as a novel, to my surprise, to my genuine surprise, there I was interested in exploring religion. My background is completely secular. I'm Canadian, we're already more secular people generally than Americans, and I was from Quebec. I'm originally from the French-speaking part of Canada. My mother tongue, in fact, is French. That's my whole schooling in English, which is why I write in English. And Quebec is by far the most secular part of North America, I would say. Quebec went through an event in the early 60s called the Quiet Revolution, which is a period of extremely rapid secularization. Where all the churches, Quebec was essentially a Catholic province. All the churches emptied themselves in a very permanent way. It was a dramatic, completely changed the culture of the place. So it went from being this quite backward, conservative Catholic place to being the most socio-democratic society in Canada, the most secular. And everyone from that generation is anti-religious and fiercely anti-clerical. And my parents were children of that revolution. And so I grew up in a household where art replaced religion. If If you want to understand who you are, why you are, look to art. Read great books, look at great paintings, listen to great music. Those are the tools with which you understand who you are, why you are. And that was fine with me, because art is extraordinary. And then finally, one year, in my early 30s, I was in India, backpacking in India. And there I saw more benign manifestations of religion. And for the first time in my life, I decided to explore the phenomenon of faith, which until then had not interested me at all. Or I was interested in secular faith, but not religious faith. I was interested in exploring faith. Why do people have faith? Even though science has been triumphant, we've done so well with science and technology in the 20th century and 21st century, why would people still hark back to this antiquated form of knowledge called religion? Why would people actually believe in things like Buddha and Shiva and Jesus? And, why? What was that mechanism there? So I was interested in exploring that with Life of Pi. So as I said, in all of these books that I wrote, and the subsequent one that Mary Louise mentioned, the Interesting Burger one, which explores representations of the Holocaust, in all of those I was interested in exploring how do we deal with something we do not understand, something that is troubling. And I think that is inherent to all artists. I think really happy people don't become artists. Or not initially. I think initially you are attracted to becoming an artist because somehow something doesn't fit. Something doesn't quite fit, and the only way of resolving that is by creating something. That is your statement on life. It is your way of, in a sense, understanding and therefore healing yourself. And it is intensely healing. And I think that's a banality. But to be creative is to heal oneself at every level. So, I suppose writing novels is what I call the high arts. But everyone who's creative in any way, I think, knows what I'm talking about. So, you go to the garden and you weed your garden. That's a creative act. You are tending that little patch of land, and afterwards, you feel good about yourself. It's nice. You have a nicer garden. Anyone who cooks a meal, anyone who dresses well to go out. All these smaller acts, these more mundane acts of creativity, I think, heal us. Because why? Because we are making something of nothing. Whereas before there was a patch of wheat with the odd comestible vegetable, afterwards, after weeding it, it is a nicer patch of garden. It's now, the weeds have gone away and the vegetables will grow better. We have improved it. And I found that to be the case with every single book that I've written, that it somehow has settled me more. And I think the effect is the same as people who take in the arts. Any viewer, everyone in this room will, I'm sure, be able to tell me of a great book they've read, a great movie they've seen, a great song they've heard on the radio, something that has and when it's good, it is so good. It just hits you, you're focused on it, and it is transformative. That has been my experience. That's exactly why, when I had to go to search for something, I turned to the arts, because I myself, as I was growing up, my parents dragged me to museums as a kid. I was bored stiff by then, and suddenly one day I woke up to, I love museums. So, for example, this morning, I had just a couple of hours, I went to your Institute for the Arts here, which is a lovely jewel of a small museum. I was dragged through those museums when I was a kid and woke up one day and saying, I love this stuff, I need this stuff, it gives me oxygen to breathe. And the same thing with books. I remember the first time I read a book that made me cry, and I was ashamed. I went to cry in the bathroom because I thought it was ridiculous. This piece of paper with little squiggles on it. How could it so move me that I would be pushed to tears? But it did. So all those things turned me on to the arts as a reader, and then I became a writer. Now, let me go on to how I wrote, how I came about writing Life of Pi. I mentioned that I went to India, and I wrote, I became interested in religion. So, those of you, let me order this so that we can do it in a sensible way. Let me very quickly say what Life of Pi is to me. Like, I was a writer, but I was also a first reader. So I know, you interpret Life of Pi any way you want. There's no right or wrong answer. There's whatever works for you as a reader. So I'll just communicate with you what my reading of the book was as a reader. Forget the fact that I wrote it. I'm just one of the readers. One of the readers happened to be the first reader. So, very quickly, Life of Pi is a story of